Hi, this is Marco Pimentel. Welcome to the podcast, Someone Like You. In this first season, you'll discover founders, creators, entrepreneurs, and business owners who are passionate about creating business models with lasting, sustainable climate solutions.
All these requirements, but also all these limitations, that made us start thinking about how about if we can generate power from already existing structures, such as building facades.
Solar energy. Currently, the sun powers about 2% of our global energy needs via solar panels. In Canada, about 0.5% of our power comes from the sun. In the US, they fare a bit better at about 3%. China, which leads the world in solar production, has contributed to making solar energy now one of the cheapest forms of energy that we have. Yes, it's now cheaper to produce solar energy than even a new coal-powered plant. Due to this, the market is booming. The new Inflation Reduction Act in the US aims to reduce solar tech costs by 20 to 40%. And reports are coming out of China that it is on pace to double its installation of solar panels in 2022, which from the previous year was also a record. But when we think of solar panels, how are they produced? Where can you install them? Are there better ways to reduce the production costs? The impact of production to the environment? Often they are produced in China, which still is largely powered by coal. And ultimately, are there new ways to put solar panels on everything? Things like cars, windows, roofs. Well, that brings me to this week's episode. Joining me is Sahar Sam, co-founder and chief security officer at Solaires. Based in Victoria, BC, Canada, the company is developing the next generation of solar cells to make solar energy more accessible with the goal to help achieve zero gas emissions. Solaires uses solar ink, an innovative solar cell technology that allows for fabrication of perovskite film used to absorb solar energy. The revolutionizing technology is light, it's flexible, and highly efficient and can be installed and absorb solar energy from anywhere, such as windows, electric cars, phones. It can even absorb light from light bulbs. Solaires technology also cuts down emissions of solar panel production by 40%. Sahar holds a Bachelor of Science and a Master's in Materials Science and Engineering from Shiraz University and a PhD in Materials Engineering from the University of Victoria. She has over 15 years of managerial experience in the industrial and academic environment and is named the inventor in 3 patents. She's also the inventor of the fabrication process for transparent conductive films and thin film solar cells at Solaires Enterprise. Here is our fascinating conversation. Sahar, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Marco.
Yeah, I wanted to start solar energy. It's a huge topic right now. I think when people think about solar, they see it on rooftops. They see, massive construction sites with solar. But where I wanted to kind of begin was, how did this become a passion for you? Why did this journey go there in terms of founding a business that's it's in the solar industry?
Yeah, for sure. So I don't want to sound like therapist, but I honestly think that whatever we do, whatever decision that we make in our life has a root in our childhood. And by saying that, I don't mean that as a child, I wanted to be a scientist, I wanted to be an astronaut. In fact, I was actually focused in a completely different industry, food industry. I was in love with ice cream when I was a kid. And all I wanted to do as a grown up is to own an ice cream shop. So that has nothing to do with what I do today. But I think what made me kind of like focus on solar energy was the way that I grew up. I was born in Iran during the war between Iran and Iraq. And during that time, everything was scarce. Food supply, energy, water, everything was scarce. And because of that, everyone, including my family, had to become creative, thinking of how to repurpose what we had or look for alternative sources. And honestly, we never took anything for granted because everything was so valuable and we cherished everything at those time. And it kind of like became part of my habit. And then when I started my bachelor and master's in material science and engineering, alternative materials and solution for energy generation became my interest. Growing up in Iran, in a country where you get sun almost more than 75 times during the year, I was always looking into how we can harness sun's energy and basically what would be the alternative solutions compared to what we have. And that kind of like where I started researching about different materials and technologies for solar energy. So that's how everything started.
So you found your interest into solar was from from a schooling perspective, or I guess you saw it where you lived. You obviously sunnier there, and you're able
Yeah.
to use the sun for that energy. But did you work in the field at all, or was it in the lab or in school that said, solar energy, I need to apply this to what I'm doing in school?
Yeah, it was mainly started at school. Like during my master's, I was focused on making different type of solar panels. We call them like thin film solar panels. When you use like a very thin layer of materials to make the solar panels, and also it was like a focus on a cheaper way of making solar panels. So that became kind of like my interest when I did more kind of like education towards different materials, different coating processes, different fabrication process. I never worked at that point. I never worked in field of solar panel fabrication. I was actually like I was in oil and gas. I was hired as an engineer in oil and gas, but I always had my eyes and my ears open for any news around the globe, what is happening with solar, what is happening with like a different part of the world with like solar panels and solar fields and utilities and everything. So, yeah.
And you're in Canada now, but where were you doing your schooling?
I did my both bachelor and masters in Iran, and then I moved to Canada in 2010, at the end of 2010, to start my PhD. I started and finished my PhD at University of Victoria.
So before we get into Solaire and what you're doing and what you're building and what you founded, I had the luck to have a conversation with you before, and yeah, I think something's stuck around the current solar production and what's happening with solar right now, and where that process is, and maybe even in relation to the good that comes with solar, but some of the issues that of course come with solar too. There's always environmental trade-offs on both sides, and so maybe it would be great just to kind of ground around what's happening right now with current solar production, and how does that happen, and how big is this industry right now?
Yeah, sure. So basically, with all the shift in the perspective of how we can use renewable energy, more renewable energy, to how to basically reduce the carbon footprint, the conversations and discussions about solar and using more solar panels like is basically like as part of like an everyday conversation. So, thinking about the abundance of solar energy, the question comes to mind that how come today only 2% of the global energy generation is from solar energy? And well, there are limitations in the current technology and also how this technology can be implemented. For example, the amount of power generation from solar panels using conventional silicon technology has reached its cap. And there's always like a theoretical cap that a, let's say, a type of material can generate power. So current technology are reaching that cap, and it is hard to increase that energy conversion efficiency using the same material. So now we need to look into either different technologies or different material to increase that power generation. And there are several studies that show if we want to supply the global power only using solar panels, we need to install solar panels in an area roughly equal to the area of Spain. So that's a large area. And of course, like, yes, there are unpopulated lands, let's say in China or Sahara Desert, but it still requires a large infrastructure cost as well as the energy transportation all around the globe. So all these requirements, but also all these limitations, that made us start thinking about how about if we can generate power from already existing structures, such as building facets. So, for example, there are so many different high rises. How about if we can cover those high rises with solar panels? We at the beginning we went even one step further and considered people who don't own a land or building. Let's say if you're renting a building, you can't install solar panels on the roof easily. Like, you basically can't touch anything about the exterior of the building. So then we started thinking about how about if we can basically create a solar panel in the form of a film that you can attach and peel on the window. Or it can be a curtain or blind that you can install and remove when you're entering, for example, when you're renting your place. So all these application, they cannot be basically we cannot use the current silicon technology for those applications because this current technology is rigid. Usually the panels are heavy and also they are opaque. So they're not very suitable for those applications that I just mentioned. And another issue is that we are trying to tackle the pollutant fabrication process and long value chain that current solar technology has. There are several energy intensive steps involved in the fabrication of current solar panels that generates high greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, it is predicted that the fabrication of solar panels can generate more CO2 than aviation by 2050. So we are using low temperature and solution based processes that can reduce the carbon footprint to 40%. And that's how we want to make solar panels more accessible and also help Canada to reach the goal of zero carbon emission that we are all talking about.
And my understanding is from the 2% that solar now is one of the cheapest forms of energy. If you're setting up looking for energy and you're setting up something new, solar is quite reasonable in terms of cost. Is that pretty accurate?
That is accurate. Like, there are so many things that needs to be considered. Yes, the solar panels are cheap, but there is a cost that needs to be paid, and that's, for example, like as I mentioned, the cost for fabrication of current solar panels. Let's say they're all made in Southeast Asia, and the base of the energy is basically coals, which means that it generates a lot of GHG while we're making something that actually helps reducing it. So yes, the money that you pay to basically purchase that solar panels might be cheap, but there are other costs that you have to pay, and that we can't ignore.
Yeah, and China, I'm assuming, owns the vast majority of the market when it comes to solar. They do
Yes.
own the vast majority of the market when it comes
Yeah.
to solar, and obviously a lot of their energy usage still comes. Obviously, they have plans to reduce this, but they still use coal. So if you're using coal to power a facility and the process to create solar, a bit of a double-edged sword.
Definitely.
How does that market, and considering that China does own the vast majority of the market, how does that come play? How does that factor into Solaire and your decisions around business, and does that factor into it?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, like, China kind of owns the market for silicon technology, and what we are trying to do is to make each country kind of like independent from China by having the capability of making not only the whole solar panel, but also the raw material in that country. So the material that we are using, it is basically easy to acquire. It doesn't require basically lots of mining or purification. And having that like abundancy of material, we can basically synthesize the new material that we're using in our own lab. So let's say in our factory, we will be able to make that material, and that reduces the dependency to other countries, the way that we are right now dependent to, let's say, China. So that plays a big role if we want to look into the future market for solar, future growth of market for solar for different countries. Let's say right now, US, Japan, Europe, there are like huge, there are huge markets, and there are like growing countries in terms of solar and solar applications. So that helps a lot, like reducing that also political issues that whenever like two countries get into like kind of a political issue, there will be like huge supply chain issues. So that all these things will like play very well if we want to make a country independent from basically supply chain, for making solar panels, or not being dependent for the raw material from other countries.
So to talk about Solaires, so when people think about solar panels, like you mentioned, vast fields, Sahara Desert, places that are really sunny. You see them on people's roofs. They're big, they're heavy, they're pretty rigid. Solaire is looking and producing. Is it a product? Obviously, that you're trying to go after a market, and this gets to the question of what is your product and what
Yeah.
you're creating.
Mhm.
That is a film that can go on a lot of different items and a lot of different applications. But is it
Mhm.
also to potentially be a replacement for the current solar panels that you do see in big fields, that you do
Mhm.
see everywhere? And so, if you can, what is Solaire and the product that you're building, and what kind of application?
Yeah, sure. So basically, to begin with, maybe I need to explain a little bit what we have in a solar panel, what a solar panel is consists of. Basically, we do have multiple layers in a solar panel, including a semiconductor material. That's the layer that actually the light gets absorbed and the free electrons are generated in that layer. And then that semiconductor material is kind of sandwiched between two conductive layer, which we call them electrodes, that guide the free electrons to the outer circuit to generate electricity. So these are the, kind of like the main, they're not the only layers, but these are the main kind of layers that we have in a solar panel. So in conventional solar panels, the semiconductor material is made of silicon, which is a solid layer, and it's made from purification of silica or sand at a very high temperature. So one of the products that we have is a solar ink. We call it solar ink. And basically, solar ink is a different type of semiconductor material that is in a form of liquid, and it's made of perovskite material. Perovskite is a name of a group of material that have a similar kind of a structure, crystal structure called perovskite. Fabrication of perovskite ink happens at room temperature, and it is faster and less expensive process compared to what we have for conventional silicon solar panels. And also, solar ink can be coated in between electrodes, that can basically absorb the light and generate electricity, same as other materials. We can basically coat this solar ink using conventional coating processes that is acceptable by industry. So that makes it easier for manufacturers to use and coat this new material. So that's currently one of the products that we have. And this material, perovskite ink, is, as I mentioned, is going to be only one layer of multiple layers that we have in a solar panel. In parallel, we are developing our own manufacturing process to use solar ink for developing a flexible and light solar panel that can be either attached to curved surfaces because it's flexible, so you can easily attach it to the curved surfaces, or it can be peeled and attached and peeled from, for example, windows, because we can also make it translucent. So it absorbs part of the light, but also let some part of the light go through, so that if you want to cover your window with it, you still can benefit from natural light. So those are the basically like parts that we cannot we cannot see in the current technology that we have. But to answer to your question, is it going to replace the current kind of applications or the current solar panels or not? I would say at the beginning, no, it will not, because at the beginning, the technology that we're developing, we are creating a different market where, as I mentioned, where current silicon technology cannot enter those markets. So, for example, like Windows, or for example, electric vehicles that require, for example, light and flexible solar panels. Those are the markets that we're entering now. But as the technology develops, this technology still has some limitations, including the lifetime of the solar panels. So, if we want to replace silicon solar panels can basically stay on the field for 25 years. Perovskite solar panels are not anywhere close to 25 years. We're aiming for 10 years. And that's why we are right now. That's another reason that we are creating a new market. We're entering a new market where you don't need to necessarily, like your solar panel doesn't necessarily need to last 25 years. And because the cost of fabrication is lower, so it's easier to replace it with the new, basically, solar panels. One good or one interesting part of perovskite and our perovskite solar ink is that it can be used on top of current silicon technology, which means that, as I mentioned at the beginning, silicon, one of the limitation is that it is getting to the highest energy that it can produce, like the material can produce. But by adding perovskite on top of silicon, we can still increase the energy conversion efficiency. So that's another kind of a use case for the solar ink that we have, and any that now we basically are working with solar module manufacturers that are looking for having a better performing material. So we supply them with our ink, and they use it in their manufacturing process, either without silicon or on top of silicon. So yeah, I don't know if I answer all your question, but basically there is no limitation of using perovskite. It can be basically in new applications, or it can be in combination with the current panels.
Every week on Someone Like You, we dive into stimulating conversations with founders, entrepreneurs, business owners, and the likes who are consciously and successfully creating sustainable business solutions for the long haul. Tune in every week for a new inspiring conversation on leading climate solutions. And if you're enjoying the podcast, don't forget, please subscribe on the platform of your choice and give us a rating and a review. With solar, you hear the energy consumption or energy conversion rate, and you had mentioned that silicon-based solar panels have hit a certain kind of threshold in terms of at least its current day technology, or maybe it is maxed out. How does solar ink compare when we talk about that energy conversion?
Yeah, so basically, again, the material perovskite, in theory, it can generate more power compared to silicon. So another positive thing about using perovskite solar ink is that we can have multiple layer of perovskite on top of each other. And that can, in theory, increase the energy or power conversion efficiency up to 2 times higher than what we can get from silicon. So that's another reason that when like the basically this material was invented as a semiconductor material that can be used for solar application. The efficiency was low at the beginning. The efficiency was like 2%, 3%. But over like 5, 10 years, the efficiency now is 25%. Our solar cells in the lab, they can generate 22% energy conversion efficiency. So the basically increase of the energy conversion efficiency was quite fast compared to what we saw in silicon technology, that it took the industry almost like 50 years to get to the level that we are right now, like 19%, 17 to 19% is the average energy conversion efficiency that we get from silicon.
And when you talk about labs and real life and
Mhm.
testing this and having this all over all of the windows in our buildings, where are you right now when it comes to, is this, is this proven yet? Is this still in the scientific research phase?
Mhm.
Can you give us some information? Where are you right now with that part of the business?
Yeah, so I briefly mentioned like how perovskite material has different benefits compared to conventional, basically silicon technology. However, it has its limitations, and one of their limitation is that perovskite is a very tricky material, and it can degrade very fast in humid environment. And which means that it has a very low shelf life. And if you want to make the ink today, I mean, if you make the ink today, you need to make the solar panels the same day. Otherwise, the ink will degrade and the solar panel may not perform well. So that poses a very basically huge obstacle towards upscaling the technology, which means now manufacturers, they need to have their basically fabrication line in a controlled environment where they can reduce the humidity to lower than 50%. Otherwise, as I mentioned, the perovskite solar panel may not perform well. Which is not a scalable kind of a process. To have everything in a very controlled environment is going to be also very costly. So what we are doing right now, Solaire actually is the only company today that can generate large volume of solar ink, which is compatible with large size coating processes and can be made, used, and also kept in ambient condition, which means that manufacturers do not need to have their manufacturing line in a controlled environment. They can use it, they can basically like keep it wherever they want, and they don't see any fluctuation in, for example, efficiency of their solar panels when they make it today or they make it tomorrow. So that's a huge step towards commercializing perovskite, and now we're supplying our material to solar module manufacturers that are looking for more stable perovskite material. So definitely, like same as other new technology, the development of the material and technology has to happen. But because silicon has already developed like throughout the year, we don't have the luxury of waiting for 50 years to make this material like scalable. So everything has to happen fast. And what we decided and what we figured out is that we are good. Let's say Solaire is really good at making the material perovskite or solar ink, and somebody else already has invested in making or developing the fabrication line. So why not working together? We supply the material, they make using the fabrication line, they make the solar panel. And that's what one thing that we're doing right now. We have, for example, different manufacturing partners around the world that we are supplying the material to them. We of course like working with them. They test the material. We work with them to make it 100% exactly what is suitable for manufacturing line. So yeah, working together, we just try to expedite the scaling of the technology.
Yeah, so when you think about product line, it's you are supplying solar ink to manufacturers that have the brand or the distribution of either maybe their current solar panel distributors or product owners, and you're providing a product to allow them to create either a new product or improve their current product in a
Right.
different way. Are there any examples? You mentioned, a film that can go on Windows. Is there
Mhm.
any application currently that you are seeing this film being put on right now that is starting to convert energy?
Yeah, so there are greenhouses that the current our current ink is being used for solar panels that are being installed on greenhouses. So that's one of the application that we're working on. And the other thing is that the flexible film that we're developing internally, there are much more application for that. So for example, another benefit of perovskite is that it can generate power from indoor light, which means that if we install those small panels on our IoT devices, let's say laptops, cell phone, smartwatches, then you can basically charge your IoT devices while you're using them, no matter what, if you're indoor or outdoor. So, kind of like it's changing the narrative of not only using sun's energy to generate power, you can generate power from indoor light, like the normal kind of a candescent light that you have. So that's another benefit that perovskite has, and we see that to go to market with the flexible light IoT devices is one of the niche market that we can enter.
Yeah, and maybe this is a bad question, but it's probably, is it similar to the idea where, calculators for years and years had its
Mhm.
power from that light? You're envisioning really essentially a film can be put in everywhere. There's, like you said, the
Right.
top of cars, greenhouses, buildings, windows, devices. Like how big do you think that this is potential? And I guess obviously you're talking to also manufacturers as well.
Right.
What are they thinking about how this might impact in terms of just getting power usage from all these devices?
Yeah, exactly. Like as when we started, maybe we were only thinking about like the usual applications for, where we can install the solar panels. Now, building integrated photovoltaics are also becoming like bigger and bigger, and everybody's talking about it. So having like a building envelope is also a big market for basically these flexible and light solar panels. But honestly, like as you mentioned, like we see that everything that needs to be charged, anything that needs to be connected to the grid in near future, they can get charged through solar panels. Like maybe like I'm not saying that right at the beginning they don't need to be connected to the grid like at all, but it can be like kind of a combination of using solar panels as well as connecting to the grid. So there's no basically limitation. Anything that needs to get charged, it can be charged by solar panels.
How have you funded the business to date? Obviously,
Mhm.
this is very research intensive, and then
Yeah.
building up a product and potentially and manufacturing partnerships, discussions, and everything like that. How has the business been funded to date?
Yeah, so we started by bootstrapping, same as other startups. We did a fundraising, friends and family fundraising after. And one thing that we were benefiting a lot is through the grants. Like Canada is really good at supporting startups And there are so many different grants for different stages of the basically growth of the company, especially like in research and development. So we're benefiting a lot from all those grants. And we started with like smaller grants that are like maybe like 10, 20, 50K, but now we're like looking into grants that are like $1 million grants. um, and of course, like to be able to get to those $1 million grants, we need to have investors money, like we need to have a matching fund. So we've been basically like talking to different investors. There are some investors, angel investors, that are specifically in clean tech, and they are comfortable with like pre-revenue companies, same as us, that are basically doing the research and development before having a final product. So we've been raising money by talking to angel investors, but definitely the next step is for us to, now that we have, for example, third-party validation, now that we have a partner that uses our ink and produces solar panels, having that solar panels in hand, then we can go to venture capitals and we can look into like raising bigger money. But that definitely happens next year.
And would you consider that to be one of Solaire's biggest challenges, is to make this, solar ink, the awareness of the solar ink? Is it the funding and trying to get enough money to then get, or is it the partnerships? Like, obviously this is a quite a large scale potential. We're talking about potential change from silicon to solar ink, and an application where we see solar panels in a lot of different places. So where has the challenges been, and I guess where do you see the challenges in the future for this?
Yeah, so the challenge, we luckily so far we never had any challenge with the partnership. We basically like we received the interest from different buyers, different potential partners and customers without like even going and knocking at their door. So that part we've been really lucky. We have a very good marketing team, so they have done a great job with like marketing our product and basically creating that relationship with the potential partners that we can have. So on that part, we don't have the challenge, or we don't see the challenge currently. Of course, like it may become a challenge as we grow, but so far that part was the easy part. The challenge comes where we basically talk to investors. There are, of course, like we have investors that are in clean tech and they want to help clean tech startups to grow. However, solar panels and solar energy, there are many people that are skeptical about it because of what happened with China, because of the crash in the market. And they are like still, they have that doubt about if this is really going to pick up, if this is really going to be a good business. So it requires lots of basically education and things that we can help with the investors to kind of like make them understand the difference between current technology and the technology that we're trying to develop, and why we think that this technology is the future, and basically how we can overcome the obstacles. So that is a long process, and that requires lots of time and patience, of course, from both sides, us and also investors. So that has been a little bit of tricky and challenging part for us, just to find the right investors that first of all is comfortable with the stage of the company, like knowing that yes, this is a basically company that will grow, but it will remain in pre-revenue stage for, let's say, 3-4 years before it can pick up and have a big revenue. So finding that strategic investors that have a belief in the market, have a belief in the business, and they're comfortable with this stage of the company, that has been challenging.
I can imagine that being the challenge. That goes also, when you think about government and how government can fund and fuel innovation, and when you're in a space where it is pre-revenue, there is that balance between, should government be helping funding these type of initiatives, which they are, and there is funding. There's, like you said, there's grants to go after too, but there needs to be a bit of a risk and reward side for both, obviously venture, but also on government for big things like this. Right,
Sure.
Which makes a lot of sense. We're kind of getting to the end of our time, so I just have one kind of last question. I've mentioned it before in the episodes, but I'm a fan of the Lorax, which I was just actually digging into. It celebrated 50 years last year, and he was definitely ahead of his time in terms of this book and the idea that they cut a bunch of trees down. You want to get bigger, 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 and all the environmental aspects. He was kind of ahead of his time in terms of climate change and what's happening right now. But I enjoy the book. I read it to my kids. But at the end of it, it's really about what can people do. And so obviously somebody like yourself is showcasing to the world what one individual can do. You connected yourself with business to science to solar, and that's having an impact, and that's quite meaningful. But what would you say that either people or businesses, like what can they do to take that first step and really get involved in the change that needs to happen? We don't have a ton of time, and wanted to get what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, for sure. So I would say every change starts within ourselves. So you can't run a clean tech company and not care about the environment in your personal life, right? You can't run a successful business unless you truly believe in the value that your business is creating. And you can't expect the next generation to work towards making a planet a better place to live unless you set a good example for them. And it doesn't need to be big. It can be as simple as teaching your kids or like little ones around you that, okay, when you leave, you need to turn off the light. You need to turn the heat off. Or, for example, buy enough food that you can consume before it goes bad so that it doesn't go to waste. Or be more cautious about the water consumption when you take shower or you do the dishes. So all these little things we can basically we need to practice it ourselves so that they learn from us. And I believe that that's kind of a snowball effect. Like what you do, you can translate it to next generation and the same. So yeah, everything starts from ourselves.
Yeah, very well said. So for our listeners wanting to find out more about Solaires, where can they find you, or where can they find more information on what you're doing? And it'd be great to understand that.
Yeah, for sure. So they can basically use our website. It is solaires.net. And they can connect me through LinkedIn. And also we have a page on LinkedIn and all the other social media, including Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. So I'll be happy to connect with everyone who's interested in Solaire or the vision that we have.
Sahar, thank you so much. Congratulations so far with everything yourself and your team have done. I am super excited to follow along. I am envisioning stickers and film and more effective conversion to energy. It is a big problem, and I'm excited. Obviously, when we talk about the United States, Biden just, the new bill that came out, I'm sure that's probably going to be somewhat impactful to you and your business. And, solar is a really important part of the process to get off of, the gases and everything else that we have going on. So I'm super excited to follow along. Thank you so much for your time, and best of luck.
Thank you so much, Marco. It was a pleasure talking to you.
This podcast is co-produced with The Brand is Female. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode of Someone Like You. And if you did, please share this. We're a new podcast, and I would love it if you could share it with a family member, friend, colleague, work colleague. Share it on Slack, whoever you do. Just share and spread the message of these incredible brands. Please also support these type of companies. They're doing the hard thing, and the hard thing often takes a lot of people to get on board. And don't forget, please subscribe on the platform of your choice and give us a rating and review. I'm Marco Pimentel. Thank you for joining us today. For more information on Someone Like You, you can find us on Instagram at Someone Like You Podcast, with all the links to the podcast, our website, and more information about the brands that we feature. Thank you again.